Hello there, healthcare employees. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Sam. I'll be your moderator today, and in just a second, we're going to be joined by Patrick Ray, one of our senior financial advisors. We've compiled a list of the 7 things we think you should do before you decide to leave your healthcare company, and Patrick is here today to speak to you on those. Before he comes on, just a quick reminder that we are not your healthcare company here. We are not affiliated nor endorsed by your healthcare company, so please keep that in mind as you're listening along. Next, I'll be entering some links that will pop up above Patrick's head while he's speaking. Feel free to click directly on those. They'll guide you to our website. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can subscribe and read many blogs we have, as well as many other really great resources we think you should take advantage of. The most important one being booking a free 15 or 30-minute block of time with one of our advisors. That is a complimentary block of time you can use to get started or updated on your retirement planning. We would be absolutely thrilled to help you if you decided to book one of those appointments. So feel free to do so. And lastly, consider following us on YouTube. You can also follow us over on LinkedIn. We post a lot of content for healthcare workers and healthcare retirees. So please consider doing that as well. And without further ado, let's jump right into it with Patrick Ray.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. My name is Patrick Ray. I'm one of the senior financial advisors here with the Retirement Group and Wealth Enhancement. And today I'm going to talk about some things that you need to consider before leaving the payroll for your specific company. And there are 7 of these things specifically that I want to touch on today. And then before I leave you, I'll give you some action items that might make some sense for you to consider in the event that some of this resonates with you. Okay, so let's get into it. 7 things to do before you actually leave the payroll. Number 1, determine how much to save for retirement. This might seem very rudimentary and incredibly basic. However, you would be surprised at how many people we see that have no clue on how much money they may need or want to live in retirement. And so what we want to do here is determine your retirement savings based on an income and a retirement age. So have some remnants of how much you're going to need to live off of or want to live off of, and then approximately when you might retire, which also may be correlated around specific regimens related to your pension plans and your actual numbers for the company that you work for. You could consider things like savings guidelines. So, for example, if you have $1 million target and you use a 4% withdrawal rate number, $1 million at 4% yields you $40,000. If you knew you needed $80,000 to live off of, then you'd need $2 million in a general context for that to be a successful plan for you. And you could also consider running a cash flow, which we always recommend, and do that with a 4% rule in place. And we can talk to you more about what the guidelines are and what the 4% rule and the guardrails are that we're referring to here in a different discussion. Next, you could determine your retirement spending needs. This is something that's pretty important, obviously, where you need to estimate a realistic post-retirement spending amount and consider things like healthcare expenses and lifestyle expenses. You may also put a variable to this where you have fixed expenses that you know are consistent on an every month in and month out basis. And then you could factor in variable expenses like travel needs and short-term one-time expenses that you might have for home improvements or other particular needs that you might have. And you could separate those two. And we can actually show you in a line item for each of these things, which are relevant to your cash flow projection. You also want to consider things like longevity, potential inheritance, the withdrawal rate that you would need to sustain a successful retirement plan, any potential major expenses that you're going to account for to consider and create an accurate retirement plan. And all of these things are relevant to considerations that the sooner that you address these and put them in context of a plan, the more comfortable you'll be when you eventually reach those retirement goals and objectives. Another big thing that a lot of people don't get to give consideration to is, will you keep or sell your home? Many of you want to continue to live in the current home that you live in, when in fact it might be a reasonable expectation to downsize or potentially live in a more favorable tax state, for example, where a state that has no income tax for a given scenario. That might make some more sense for you to consider. So there's a number of reasons why determining your retirement spending needs are crucial to meeting your overall goals and objectives long term. Creating a retirement income plan is a big deal. Obviously, we need to know where the income is going to come from. And this gets into some of the folks that are joining us today that are concerned about which plan option to take with respect to their pension. So some of you may have an option to take a lump sum, or you could take an annuity payment, or in some cases, you could take a combination of both of those things. And so many of our folks are eager to learn the differences between those options and how they apply to their given circumstance. And so we certainly recommend understanding the potential benefits and drawbacks of all of your payment options and how they apply to you and your family and your household. You want to follow the interest rates, and certainly given that you could have a lump sum if your plan allows so, you'll want to pay close attention to those because the lump sum is tied directly to the interest rates. And so oftentimes we help our folks exit into a successful retirement by giving them an appropriate date to retire or consider retiring or leaving the payroll because of what the interest rates actually do to their lump sum. So having said that, that's certainly something that would be of consideration that you would want to take into account. And then if you're considering taking the annuity payment, something to consider is a thing called pension maximization. And this happens to be a tool that allows you to consider maximizing the amount of income you would get, regardless of if you're alive or if you're married, your spouse is receiving the benefits. And certainly a plan that would take into consideration pension maximization would give you the utmost in not only favorable income while you're alive, but also a tax favorable plan for your spouse when you suffer an untimely death. Social Security is obviously a big consideration for many of you, and I would consider on most occasions running a very, very conservative estimate on your Social Security, especially if you happen to be one of those individuals who are concerned about the well-being of Social Security and what it means to the longevity of the plan, and if it's even going to be a viable solution for you to create income or get income from. So establishing logins to run estimates and varying the different monthly benefits, of course, for both you and or your spouse if you're married, are all considerations that we want to give special attention to. And then plan distributions from your retirement accounts. We have a special presentation that talks about tax favorable retirement and being a tax efficient retirement. And that has some, oddly enough, uncharacteristically important topics that people would not consider on a general context because of where you sit from a taxable nature and certainly where you are in the tax brackets as far as your household is concerned. And so having a plan with relationship to the distributions from your retirement accounts is of utmost importance to many of our folks, for sure. And then any other sources of retirement. Maybe you're planning on working part-time to create some spendable income, so you just have a little money in your pocket to live off of. Maybe the idea is to postpone taking withdrawals from your lump sum in your 401k plan that you merge together and put into an IRA so that you can allow that to grow for a 2 to 3 year window before you start taking withdrawals from it. And so accounting for other sources of income are certainly part of the planning process that we want to give careful consideration to. Now, here's one that doesn't get much consideration with respect to the general context, but calculating an after-tax rate of return on your investments is a big deal, okay? And what we mean by after-tax rate of return is almost a net rate of return, which includes also the expenditures that you're going to pay. You may be deciding to work with a team of advisors or an investment advisory group that charges you for their services. And you want to consider what that means in addition to if you're withdrawing money from a qualified plan source, what the net tax rate of return would be on your investments to be able to calculate and ensure a successful portfolio can produce the amount of money that you need to live off of over your lifetime. And another caveat to the investment and kind of the context of where your money should actually be invested at is determining your risk tolerance. You'd be surprised at the number of people that we see that think that if I asked them on a scale of 1 to 10 where they fall on a risk level, they'd say on average somewhere between 4 and 5, and yet they have 100% of their money in their 401k invested in the stock market. And so those two things often don't correlate, which technically leads to an unfavorable experience when you go to retire and what you can expect. And I think from a retirement perspective, you want to have as much expectation on what your future looks like as possible, right? And having a understanding of what your net after-tax rate of return needs to be in respect, and also where your money should be invested for how much risk that you're willing to assume to meet those goals and objectives are both key favorable scenarios that you want to consider and take into consideration. This is a big one. Certainly reviewing your healthcare options is a big deal. We want to ensure that continuous healthcare during your transition into retirement is not only something that is in force, but is also a consideration when you run your plans, especially if you're retiring before your age 65. So many of you know that when you reach the age of 65, Medicare becomes your primary health insurance. But what we want to consider is the spouse's scenario, your retirement coverage, potential COBRA options, any healthcare that could be available to you in the marketplace if you're under 65, or what options that you have once you get to 65 for Medicare related purposes. We also want to talk about your HSA funds and talk about the eligibility of those meeting your future healthcare expenses even after your retirement is set forth. And making sure that you spend any of your FSA monies, because those don't have rollover options. And so you lose your FSA benefits if you don't use them in a given year. So obviously we want to pay attention closely to that scenario as well. Now, implementing a tax smart retirement. I talked a little bit about this a few minutes ago. We have a whole presentation that talks about a tax efficient retirement. And one of the things we need to consider, especially for those of you who are under the age of 59 and a half, is does 72T and or post 55 make any sense to give some consideration to? And we'd have to explain to you in detail what that means, how it works, and what you can expect if you decide to put one of those plans in place. Utilizing net unrealized appreciation is a big deal, often overlooked. If you have individual stock from a publicly traded company inside your 401k, this would apply to you. It's not necessarily a guarantee that it would make sense for you to consider, but the bottom line is if you don't consider it, you're giving up a potential option that could save you tens and tens of thousands of dollars, and in some cases more for tax-related purposes. Tailing your contributions to Roth or tax-deferred accounts based on your current tax situation is certainly a big deal. As it turns out, I just had a conversation with my son over the weekend about how he was contributing money to his 401k. And based on his tax bracket, it made sense for him to shift some of his money so that he puts a little bit more into the pre-tax portion because it would reduce their taxable income. He had a little bit too much going into the Roth 401k part of his plan. And so in this case, this saved him a number of thousands of dollars in a projection because he was able to earmark more money to go into a pre-tax portion, which would reduce his taxable income in the given year he's making the deposits. And then determining if you need to move to a state. I mentioned this a few slides ago when we talked about potentially needing to reduce the size of your home or downsize, or potentially move to a more favorable state, which gives you considerations for things like less taxes that you're paying. And so there are states that are more favorable than others to consider if you're going to potentially relocate. And so determining if you may need to move to a state would certainly be of great interest to most of you to at least consider. And then create and craft a tax strategy, which we can help you with for retirement. Now, running a cash flow is easily the most important thing. And I've never spoke to any of the thousands of people that I've met with over my 26-year career that said that they did too much planning to meet their retirement goals and objectives. Okay, that sounds kind of silly, but it's true, right? There's no such thing as over planning. And so cash flows will do things like help you determine if a lump sum is better than an annuity option, or if the annuity option is a better option than the lump sum for you. We can include healthcare premiums. In fact, I would recommend that when you run your cash flow projection, that you run a separate line item over and above your fixed expenses for what healthcare could potentially cost you. And we can even assign a greater inflationary rate to that number, since healthcare is typically increasing on a higher level than just our regular spendable needs are from a month-to-month or from a year-to-year basis. The cash flow will also assist you in determining if a 401k rollover is the best option for you to consider when you leave money into the plan, or taking money and putting it into an IRA, and that depends on a lot of things. And then also it will determine withdrawing all of your money on taxes and penalties and potential growth opportunities, and where the most ideal setup will be for you. And it also assists with helping allocations, like maybe you don't need to take as much risk to meet your overall goals and objectives because you have more money than you technically need. But on the other hand, you could need to have a more aggressive approach to meet your overall goals because you haven't saved as much money as you otherwise would have liked. So here's the reality. Most people over the age of 50 do not have a written financial plan. In fact, 74% of the people over the age of 50 don't have one. And it's silly because firms like ours, we do it for a complimentary service to you to offer an understanding of how we can do and help you in partnership when you decide to transition into retirement. And so we have a ton of experience with our team and helping people from Fortune 100 companies plan for and obtain and transition into a successful retirement with offices all across the country, and specific knowledge in many of the plans related to their savings plans and their 401k plans and their pension plans and medical plans. And so the cash flow is complimentary. And if you're open to understanding how this might apply to you specifically, I would encourage you to call 800-900-5867. You can also take a picture of this QR code to the left, and it will get you to a calendar where you can schedule a time with myself or one of my coworkers to help you put together a plan that's consistent with your needs and objectives. And the QR code to the right is a LinkedIn QR code, which allows you to get access to company-specific pages where we have a lot of specific data for a lot of companies that you might want to take into consideration. And so you might want to breeze through this to see if you work for one of the companies that we follow and we give a lot of free information for. And in the end, like I had mentioned earlier, there's no such thing as too much planning. So with that, I'll leave you for the afternoon, and I appreciate your attention today. All right, take care. Have a great day.